everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast, and I'm your host, Olivia Fierro, full-time morning news anchor, part-time podcaster, and lifetime bookworm. So stay tuned. After our interview for A Moment with Margaret, we are going to be discussing some new releases this month of March, and we'll run through what we're adding to our own TBR stacks that, as you know, grow and grow really by the day. So speaking of your TBR, we want to get to our guest today. I'm very excited about this. Maggie Smith, she's got a big resume. She's the managing editor of Right City Magazine and the host of the podcast Hear Us Roar. Not to be confused with the actress of Downton Abbey by the same name, unless, Maggie, you're getting a dinner reservation, and that probably can serve you very well if you're visiting London or something. But we're adding novelist to your must-read introduction of a lady doing a lot of things. So, Maggie, thank you so much for joining us to talk about your debut novel, Truth and Other Lies.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it is so exciting. So this book I found to be a delightful page-turner, and it has a lot to it. So we start out with Megan, who is a young journalist, and her life has basically hit the skids. Things are falling apart for her. The relationship is over, and she has just lost her job at the newspaper, and she has to do dreaded of all things, return home and move in with mom, at least momentarily. Cringe, ooh. We've all had that fear, if not had that experience. No offense, Mom. So, Maggie, talk me through the concept of this story and how you decided on this character in particular and journey for your debut book.
Well, I wanted to write a book about a young girl in her 20s, channel back to my days in my 20s, but also then have her at a time when she's trying to look of what kind of role model does she want to pattern her life after. And I think that that's something that a lot of people in mid-20s do. They realize that, they're out of college, they're trying to start a career, and they are looking around for what's my life going to be like. And maybe at some level I think that the decisions you make at that age wind up really affecting your life. I'm not sure you realize it at that age. But she doesn't look to her mother for a role model. She and her mother have a contentious relationship, a prickly relationship. Megan feels as though her mother, Helen, has been very overprotective of her all her life, and that she's really had to kind of fight against just being subsumed by her mother. And she's broken away because she has gone from Chicago to New York for 3 years, but now she's back in Chicago living with her mother. So she's looking around for, not wanting to have that as a role model. And through kind of a fluke, she meets a very, very famous journalist. And I tell people, imagine you met Diane Sawyer. Mm-hmm. It's not just somebody at the local station. It's somebody that everybody would recognize on the street. And she is back in Chicago as well, writing a memoir. And so Megan is somewhat hero worship, but also somewhat aware enough to say, maybe this woman could introduce me to people. So she's kind of glomming on to this character whose name is Jocelyn Jones in both a hero worship, both a role model worship, mentor-mentee relationship, but also an opportunistic relationship.
So there's 3 female characters here, and they are all very interesting. They are all strivers, all focusing on a goal. So Megan is trying to get her life back on track. She's got this hiccup already in her very young career so far, and she really needs to make sure that she doesn't get left out of the profession that she has longed to be a part of and is called to be a part of. So Jocelyn Jones, of course, seems to have it all, has the name recognition, has the incredible stories to tell, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, a journalist, and so she seems to have it all. Writing her memoir, needs a little bit of help and support from Megan. The third party that we've got to talk about is Ms. Helen Watkins, who is mom to Megan, but is thrust into the potential national spotlight, all of a sudden running for a spot at the U.S. House of Representatives. So she goes from stay-at-home mom to conservative political darling in what feels like a blink for Meghan. And at the core of the politics is really a rift and a big space between these two women.
Right. They've always been somewhat at loggerheads about social issues. And I kind of named the big ones: gun control, climate change, abortion. And actually, Helen is tapped to run for office because she didn't exactly go from homemaker to congresswoman. She was an activist in the middle of that, and she was very much the face of pro-life in Illinois. And so that is something that the Republican Party is looking to her because she has that name recognition. And they're kind of pinning a lot of the election on that issue. So that is one of the ways that Meghan feels as though Jocelyn and her feel exactly the same about all these issues, and her mother and her do not, and they don't see eye to eye. And that has gone back way into when Meghan mentions having been in high school and worked for the Obama campaign, and her mother worked for McCain. And so that has been a long-standing issue between them, as it is for a lot of people in the country right now.
Well, and I thought that it was particularly timely. Obviously, working in news, there's a lot of themes that I connected to with this book, besides just enjoying being on this journey and wondering where this is going to go, because we get a lot of elements of, there's blackmail and there's all of this, a lot going on. But this tensions that we've experienced over the past few years, politics and political discourse has ripped families apart. Everybody knows somebody who has no longer speaking to somebody, or absolutely dreads connecting with friends, old friends or family, because of political differences. Things are so different. So it's just a very palpable, very understandable tension that is really exhausting, and you feel what Meghan's going through.
Right. And also, she's finding that when she goes, she doesn't find very many job openings, but the few that she does, they're saying, well, your mother's running for Congress. We can't hire you until after the election. So now she's kind of stuck. She can't really even find a job in her field because of her mother's decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, it's a complicated situation, and it was, I've thought, a very clever situation to lay out. I want to talk to you about how the scene where we have Meghan meet Jocelyn. Jocelyn is speaking on campus, at a college campus, and she, as you mentioned, is a star in her industry, and certainly somebody that Meghan has looked up to and would love to have had the opportunity to connect to, and she does in a very unusual way.
Yes, she does. She's basically there with her best friend Becca, and ostensibly they're there to check the jobs board to see if she can find any openings that she hasn't been able to find online. And she's standing very close to where Jocelyn is. This is a campus rally against sexual violence at Northwestern, which is where Meghan graduated from. And there are some alt-right, close to Nazis, at least that is how they're dressed. And one of them throws a water balloon at Jocelyn, and looks like he's getting ready to throw another one. And Meghan just kind of steps in and puts him on the ground. Apparently she learned some tricks back in Brooklyn when she was a reporter out there. And so she and Becca now are kind of recovering from her wounds because somebody else jumps in, and there's a little bit of a fracas there. And at one point she says, I report the news. I don't want to be the news, And so she and Becca have finally gone to the EMTs and, got her cheek bandaged up, and she's kind of recovering herself. And Jocelyn Jones is suddenly in front of her saying, thank you for attacking this person. So it's a meet cute, I guess you would say.
Really, yeah. It is. It makes an impression.
And she's kind of thinking that maybe she's hallucinating. So she again, we see Meghan being somewhat hero worshiping, but also opportunistic in that she, when it looks like Jocelyn is just saying, well, thank you for doing that. And I'll get in touch with you or something. She's like, no, wait, do you have a business card? Because she's thinking, what if she never calls me?
Right.
So she knows enough to want this to happen, to be able to play this for what it's worth. And at the end of that chapter, I think she says something about, they say it's not what you know, but who you know. And as of today, I know Jocelyn Jones.
Yeah.
And so you see that she is a savvy enough person to know that this could do her some good in her career.
There's a lot of themes that this book touches on. Of course, the mother-daughter dynamics, which are often challenging. I mean, aside from the very unique circumstances, of course, with these that would make it interesting to a book, it just is. It is. Many people have a relationship that they wish were different, or they wish they were on the same page, or able to communicate, or have that open dialogue and feel not on edge or not in the needing to impress their parent. So I was reading a little bit about you, and you had written on your website about your own relationship with your mom and how that had kind of influenced some of the writing here, and that you were kind of able to, I guess, when someone sits down to the page to create fiction, you're able to sort of rewrite or get a new try at a relationship and make it go in a different direction.
Yeah, that's true, and that was part of the backstory of how I started down this writing path, because I have only been doing it for 3 or 4 years now. Is that someone at a writing workshop gave me the prompt of, I could never write a book about, and I put mothers and daughters, because I thought I have not been a biological mother, although I have been a stepmom. But my mother and I, as you described, had a prickly relationship. It seems like from the moment I was born, maybe. I don't know. But we never really healed that relationship, and she has subsequently died. So I felt like the initial scenes of Megan and her mother were very easy to write, because they were kind of scenes I'd lived through. The dialogue came very easily because my mother was, I felt, very passive aggressive. I would go away from encounters with her, and she wasn't ever yelling or being really mean. It just seemed like, why do I feel bad every time I see her? And it took later I was trained as a psychologist in another life. And when I began to understand some of those things, I thought, well, that she's really passive aggressive. She's very good at that. And so I did channel a lot of that into Helen. And I think as the book went on, I was still making her somewhat of a caricature. Mm-hmm. So she was the hardest one for me to write as a real person, because I was still in my head saying, this is my mother. And it took, an editor that I worked with to say, she's more complicated than that, and you need to dig deeper about what's going on with her. And there needs to be some progression in this relationship. Otherwise, it's not interesting. If they're still arguing at the end of the book, just like they were at the beginning, why is that interesting to read? Let's figure out what can happen between the two of them.
Yeah, and the way that the story unfolds, of course, never to give anything away, but you do start to understand the complexities, and I think as daughters, we very much have a hard time seeing our mothers as real women who have had lives outside of what we know or what they've presented in the relationship in relation to us. We think that as the kid that we're the son and everything revolves around, and so we don't often give enough thought to maybe why someone is the way they are or is limited emotionally in whichever way based upon what had happened before. So I thought you really did a beautiful job of crafting that, no matter how hard maybe it was to work through behind the scenes. I did want to talk to you a little bit about just your interesting life coming toward writing. I mean, you bring such perspective. I mean, a career in psychology, number one, as you mentioned, and also work as a businesswoman and owning a business that you spent many years with as Art Source. Mm-hmm. So had you itched to write all your life?
Well, I had been in journalism when I was in high school. I was the editor of the newspaper. So of course I was writing and I was then also editing. And then I did go to journalism school. I went to the same school that I put Megan in. Why not? Because I know about it. So I went to Medill I was born in Oklahoma, but I went all the way to the big city in Chicago when I first went to college. So I was in journalism for the first part of my career in college. And that's very different than creative writing. The journalist is much more, sit down and type it and it's due in 15 minutes. But I am okay at writing. I can write and put sentences together. And so when I was in the art business, that was creative, but I wasn't the artist. I wasn't creating the art. It was much more of a business for me. And so I was looking for an outlet, and I came across, well, I guess my husband said, well, you can't sing worth a lick, so don't try that.
Please don't try that.
And one time I had tried painting, and somebody said, I don't know what that is, but...
So it's abstract.
So, I'm just kind of working my way through the creative outlets here. And I thought, well, writing, I probably do writing. So that turned out to be something that I really enjoyed. And, but like I said, I haven't been doing it that long. This is my first novel.
Well, Maggie, I would say not too bad. I was just looking at Marie Claire including Truth and Other Lies in their best of the 2022 books out there. So, I mean...
I know. I've been amazed. I've had lots of great mentions and lots of things. It's kind of like pinch me moment a little bit.
Oh, it's fantastic, right? And I obviously you have a genuine curiosity about people, and it's sort of like, and I love the idea of somebody beginning to write fiction a little bit later in life, because it's all that life and all of those people that you've encountered through the course of these other experiences and other careers that allow you to really pick up the nuances of what make people so odd and interesting and worth reading about.
Odd. Well, I think, we were talking about how Megan is needing to understand her mother a little bit more, but her mother is also having a journey to go in to see Megan as an adult. Mm-hmm. And I think at one point, Megan says, if I want to be treated as an adult, I'd better start acting like one. So you see her kind of getting more self-aware as the book goes on, that maybe there are some things where she is still acting like the college-age student and is not yet acting as more like she wants her mother to treat her as an adult. Well, she needs to also act that way.
And it is sometimes hard. It's hard to not fall into the old feeling like a kid or being like a kid when you're in those environments. And I could understand why she wanted to get back out of mom's house as soon as possible, just to not be trapped forever. In your work at Right City Magazine, you host the Heroes Roar podcast. You're giving a platform to talk to novelists and other writers and I think all women about their craft as well.
Women's fiction writers, which tend to be women.
Yeah.
I think I've done about 130 episodes and one was a man.
Oh, right. So what do you enjoy most about these conversations that you have with other writers, and how I love to hear about sort of the connections that writers make with each other and that supportive community. I mean, it seems to be the ultimate type sorority where you've got all of these creative, brilliant minds together, and to be able to feed off each other or hit a roadblock and have other writers to turn to or at least have heard how they, made it to completion, to type the words the end.
I like the sorority analogy there. I think you've hit on the two things it's support, encouragement. So the psychological support part that you need. And it's also practical because you can ask questions like, I don't know, what is NetGalley? I don't know, should I do this?
Yes, you should.
What's a bookstagrammer? Because when you're just starting out, you don't know all this stuff about the publishing industry. And it's nice to have all these people that will tell you about it and will gladly tell you about it. They want to help you. Yeah, when I started the podcast, it was about 3 years ago, and the Women's Fiction Writers Association and all the people belong to that. So that's one of the reasons they're on the podcast. It only had 500 members, and now we have 1,800 members. So it has grown like Topsy. And as well, there have been a lot of those people getting published. So my list of people to have on the podcast keeps growing, so that now I'm interviewing people probably 9 months after their release because there's just that many people in line ahead of them. But I will say that every single one is so interesting. I usually do it Monday, Tuesday, and I'll come down to dinner after I've done it and say to my husband, I just interviewed the most interesting person. And he will say, you do realize you say that every week. I know, but she was like the last one that I interviewed was a roadie for Nora Jones. She was a lighting electrician for Nora Jones.
Ah.
There was a woman that lived in Iraq and her best friend was spying on her. She found out later. I mean, it was just, they're just coming up with these unbelievable life stories.
Wow.
I pale in comparison to them.
Wow.
They're just always very interesting. Even when I'm going in and think, oh, well, this was kind of a small book. I really haven't heard very much about it. They have a very interesting life story. So
that is so cool. I obviously, if we have a passion for books, which we do, there is just something delightful about being able to speak to the creative person who is able to, make this happen. And so, how does it feel for you? And I know, I assume that you had a passion for books. I read you were a little kid always with a book in your hand. So
right.
To have your own book in your hand now, what is this
it
moment
is a
feel
little
like?
strange. It is a little strange to read passages and think, I wrote that. I was more struck when I was listening to the audiobook, I think, because the audio narrator is an actress, and so she's more acting it out than reading it. And so she has different voices for the different characters. And that was even more strange than reading it because it was such a different format. It's all just very strange, but it's wonderful. It's really cool. I'm appreciating every single moment of it because I know in May it'll be, who were you again?
Well,
there'll be a whole new crop of people with their debuts.
Well, that's a challenge. There's just always good books coming out, and it's just hard to ever find the time. And we would love to full time just be able to sit and read, and then do the audiobooks when we have to do some exercise or go to the grocery store or something like that. But we have to come to work. Usually, most people have to do some other responsibilities through the course of the day. Before I wrap up, I want to know what it was that you remember when you were very young and you fell in love with reading. What was it? What was it that clicked, or was there a certain book in particular or writer in particular? And then also, especially from your own experience and the advantage of speaking to so many writers, what is the best little nugget of advice you can get to somebody who loves books, reads all the time, and just thinks, gosh, I couldn't possibly. What could I have to say that would be worth reading? How do I start?
Well, in terms of reading, I read at a very early age because I can remember knowing a little bit how to read when I went to school. And I didn't go to preschool or anything, so that would have just been kindergarten. And I was always wanting to read myself as opposed to having people read to me, like my mother, for example. So I learned to read at a very early age. The first ones I really remember are like the Nancy Drew. I'm still very fascinated by mysteries. I read the entire Agatha Christie the minute I was introduced to her, and then looked around and said, what do you mean she's dead? There's no more? Oh my gosh, I used them all up. And the first adult book I can remember was Gone with the Wind. I don't even know how I was able to read that when I was a teenager, because it sounds like something my parents would not let me have. But I do remember on Thanksgiving reading it and not wanting to come to Thanksgiving dinner because I was not wanting to stop reading. So being forced to come to Thanksgiving dinner and eating it very quickly so I could get back. In terms of writing advice, I guess I'd say. You're never too old. Try it. There's so many different ways to get published nowadays. It's actually an easier road than it was 10 years ago, because 10 years ago, the indie movement, the ability to do it on your own, the presence of hybrid presses and small presses was not nearly as common as it is now. So if you couldn't get signed by an agent and a big publisher, you were out of luck. And now you really aren't. There's lots of avenues. I would say fully half to more of the people I'm on the interview on the podcast are not with the big four.
Mhm.
So they got out in the marketplace, and then you have to hustle, and you have to market yourself and your book, and you have to write a good book. So that's another whole
Oh, yeah,
task
that
that is
part.
not easy. It is not easy to write a novel. So you really have to. When I ask people what surprised you that you learned about yourself in writing the book, it's not uncommon. A lot of them say that I could stick with it.
Yeah.
Because it is something that, particularly when it's your first one and you don't know what you're doing, it's hard enough to write a novel, and then when you don't know what you're doing, it's even harder.
Mhm.
So the fact that they persevered. So if you feel like you are someone that can persevere, take on a long-term project that might be years and stick with it, I would say come up with a hook story that you'd like to spend that much time with, and just try it.
Just try it.
Put your butt in the chair and stay there and
Yeah.
keep typing.
And the reality is that many of the authors that we've been able to speak to who have had, New York Times bestsellers and dozens of books published say that oftentimes they still sit down and go, I don't think I can do it when they start a new one. And then they have to refer to their own book covers or be reminded by their friends and family, like, you say this every time, so just go back and sit down and you will finish this one again. And
well, that's because it's hard. It never gets to be easy, I don't think, for anybody.
This has a feel to me that it could easily be a film. Are you working on any other avenues?
I have had a couple little nibbles, nothing that, is really anything at this point, but I have had some people, say that. I actually posted on Instagram my ideal cast, which was Annette Bening as Jocelyn Jones, Laura Linney as the mother, and the girl that played the daughter on Mad Men, she's now 24, 25. Kiernan Shipka, I think is her name, as Megan. So
nailed it.
Laura or Annette or
hello, welcome.
If you're listening, I'll be glad to send you an ARC.
Yes, she will send you an autographed copy of the book. And also, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for listening to the podcast. Well, Maggie Smith, congratulations. If you're listening to this podcast, you can get this book right away, as you should. The novel is Truth and Other Lies. Maggie Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Oh, it is time for a moment with Margaret, just wrapping up a conversation with Maggie Smith, Truth and Other Lies, another March release, a debut, and definitely, I think, a worthwhile book.
Absolutely. And I will say that I have one of her poetry books in NetGalley.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that I believe it's her. Same Maggie Smith, I believe. The writer.
Not the actress.
Not from Downton Abbey or Harry Potter or literally the longest list.
Wouldn't it be weird to share a name with somebody who had such a famous name?
Well, I've told you, my name's not Martha, but you know that I get the Martha Stewart thing all the time.
That is so crazy.
We were just, with Meredith being purchased, I was like, oh, please, no more Martha Stewart emails, please. They finally stopped.
Oh.
because I don't have the Meredith email anymore.
Wouldn't it have been nice to just get something out of it, though? Like a gift or
Packages?
Something, some kind of high-end doodad or yacht invitation meant for Martha Stewart.
From Snoop Dogg, maybe? I would have loved a personal invitation to the Super Bowl halftime show.
You're right, yeah. Or some package that's been sent from Snoop Dogg that you have to be very careful when to open.
Legal in Arizona?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so digging into what's coming out that's on your radar that you're definitely adding to your TBR or maybe you're able to read before release.
So way back when.
Way back.
I mean, it's been months since I started talking about Simone St. James' new book. It's finally out this week. That's the Book of Cold Cases. I did a little synopsis of each of these books. I also looked up their Goodreads numbers. So it's a 4.05, which is fairly good for a book that's not out yet. And basically, it's a true crime writer who gets a chance to interview a woman who had been charged and acquitted with some murders back in the 70s. And so she goes over the woman's house, her mansion, and some weird things start happening, like cupboards opening while she turns her back and turns back around and all these cupboards are open. So then eventually she gets to the heart of what really happened back in the 70s.
Ooh, I like it.
It's so good. And, she wrote The Sundown Motel, loved that book. So she has a good knack for making spooky places even spookier.
Cool.
So that's finally out.
Okay, you're not just like dangling something that people can't have access to anymore.
I dangled that months ago and I was like, I probably shouldn't. But at least you can write it down. You know it's out now. The Match, Harlan Coben, who he's been churning out some novels lately. So this one actually has a 4.29 on Goodreads. And this is like a kid that was found living in the woods and he didn't have a family. And then he grows up and he does a DNA match and he finds his father. And then he starts digging more into his past online. And he kind of gets into an online forum that he gets really obsessed with. And then suddenly members of that group, one by one, are being killed. And so there's a serial killer who's kind of like stalking them, and they plan to go for him next. So he's trying to figure that out.
His name is everywhere right now because so many of these books are being adapted. It's all Netflix, I think.
He actually has a show on Netflix. I can't remember.
There's a couple of them. So there was The Stranger and
what was the other one?
The one where it's the woman who she's hiding her past. She was a dancer, and then she kind of had to do like hide
Melissa
her identity.
I'm kidding.
No.
Wow. That was a deep cut for
I think there's like a third one. They're adapting basically everything.
I think it was called like Stay
Close.
Stay Close.
Stay Close, which was great.
Yeah.
And then The Stranger, and I think there's something else coming out too.
I mean, you get a couple things on Netflix. I think you're set. I think you're doing great. And then a lot of thrillers out this week. Those are the ones that jumped out to me. Here's one that both you and I haven't read, but we both marked it on Goodreads as one to read. It's got a little bit of a lower Goodreads at 3.86, but it is 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. And he did The Kind Worth Killing, Her Every Fear. This is 9 people. They end up they all get a list of their names. It's like just a list of names, and there's no context. And one by one, weird things start happening to them. They all kind of perish. But there's an FBI agent who her name is on the list, and she's trying to stop it before it continues. So
I loved The Kind Worth Killing. So this kind of story appeals to me.
I read Her Every Fear, and I really enjoyed it, and it reminded me a lot of another book. So I get the two of them mixed up a little bit, but a lot of good thrillers out this week. I love a thriller.
Love a thriller. So I mean, there's so many great releases for this spring. And I also wanted to mention, I was looking through what was coming out, and it's great when something comes out in paperback because a lot of people just don't want to go there with buying a whole hardcover. It is a big commitment.
Well, it's also easier to carry around, like to the pool, which we're heading into pool season.
Yes. So Dr. Amy Shah, I'm So Effin Tired, who was a guest in one of our very early episodes of the podcast and is a friend here in Arizona. She wrote that book about just strategies to deal with just the chronic fatigue that everybody is feeling and a lot of things that you can change with changing your sleep patterns, your intermittent fasting, your circadian rhythms, all of this stuff. So now that's in paperback. And it is that kind of book that you kind of want as a reference material. It's got recipes and stuff. So it would be helpful to have on the go.
Lovely.
Yay.
Yep. I'll check it out.
Well, Margaret, it was great to talk books with you today.
Back in the studio.
Moment with Margaret. And by the way, when you were talking about that, about the cold cases, what's it called again?
The Book of Cold Cases.
The Book of Cold Cases. I was so close. I just watched the first episode of Indefensible. It's on A&E.
Oh boy.
They hooked me on it because it was connected to the first episode of the season of Killing Eve. And so
they got you.
I love Killing Eve. But this is kind of a, I don't want to say it's like a comedy center. It's not like a spoof, but the host is really funny, and she's looking into cases that are like insane. And she begins with one in Scottsdale, and it's a murder in the 1970s. A husband who kills his wife, and nobody's disputing that he killed her, but the jury lets him off because a forensic psychologist basically testifies that she drove him to kill her with her annoying, essentially, behavior and spending and whatever, and that really it was her master plan, that she was suicidal, and so rather than taking her own life, she just little by little drove him nuts so that he would kill her, and this actually happened. And so but she's so funny, but it's like so absurd. And so she tracks down this psychologist, I guess. And so she's asking him questions, and it's an amazing exchange.
How interesting.
And so she's like, and he's kind of like, I don't think I like the tone of where you're going with
Man,
this.
the 70s were a time.
Crazy. I mean, it's crazy. So anyway, that kind of made me think of that because, looking at real cases, there is some nutty stuff that you would say truth is stranger than fiction, and we know that for a fact.
You couldn't write that.
You couldn't write it. Nobody would believe it was real. All right, Margaret, happy reading to you. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. Our editor is Nick Sanchez. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.